The obvious ones are, yes, you have to be relentless. You have to be curious. You have to be a super learner. Those kind of go without saying. The kind of not so obvious things here, especially in deep tech, and especially if you want to be around for a while. The first one for me is, as you mentioned earlier, maturity. And for me, maturity is about having a strong internal locus of control. And that means not letting yourself get swept away by passions, by different emotions, by being able to keep your shit together. And you've got to keep it together in front of your team, because if you don't, that will scare them off. You have to keep it together in front of your board. You certainly have to keep it together in front of your market.
So, Chris, you spent 25 years in executive search, working with global firms, and then eventually founding your own. But at some point, you decided to specialize in deep tech, these companies that are focused on building these breakthrough technologies or commercializing breakthrough technologies. And I'm so curious, what pulled you toward this specific challenge? Was there a tipping point or a seminal moment?
I've always been in executive search for 30 years, and it started by focusing on enterprise software, which back in the 90s was one of the most popular areas to focus on. So like everyone else, I started in that area. Enterprise software is very lucrative, but frankly, I was getting bored. The idea of doing another VP EMEA for an accounting software company just filled me with dread. And I was starting to get close to some venture capital firms in the early 2000s. And one of them said to me, we have this weird other thing in our portfolio. We don't know quite what to do with it, but it needs some leadership help. Do you want to take a look at it? And it was an advanced materials company. And I had never even heard of advanced materials. And this would have been in 2005. And so I said, yeah, sure, why not? I was really interested in just building the relationship with them. But then I learned about the company, learned what they were doing. They were a spin out from Imperial College in London. And I thought, actually, this is super exciting, really interesting. So I was still winning work from the software industry, but over time, I consciously decided I'm going to move to some of this more innovative stuff, because the problems they're solving are just so much bigger. Who cares if there's another CRM software vendor on the market? Absolutely no one. But who cares if we can make the world cleaner, healthier, and more intelligent in some way? Everyone cares about that. So if I'm going to do this role, then at least let me believe in the companies that I'm representing and supporting. So I decided to focus on that. And I would say that by 2011, I was firmly focused on just that.
Yeah. So a little bit before everybody else caught on, but enough time to really...
It was a long time. We didn't call it deep tech. Actually, most people didn't know what to call it. It was just other random stuff. I often referred to it as the physical sciences, stuff that wasn't software. Was another common moniker.
Yeah, that so resonates. I mean, that's exactly why I wanted to specialize in deep tech, working with deep tech founders who are so passionate about what they're doing, and they are solving these huge planetary problems that are going to serve the 99%, not the 1% who wants a 15-minute delivery of an apple.
That's exactly it. Look, those are convenient too, and I use them as a consumer. But if I want to look my children in the eye and say, hey, I tried to make the world better in some way, I can do it.
Yeah, same. So you recently wrote about 5 distinct founder CEO archetypes in deep tech. Yep. And not to pigeonhole anyone, but just to make the point that leadership in deep tech isn't this generic thing. So I wonder if you could just walk us through each archetype briefly, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the qualities they have in common, some of the risk factors for each archetype.
Absolutely. I think to kind of frame it to start, as you rightly say, this isn't about judging anyone. We write a lot about the lab to market journey and the different elements and features and phases and stages and challenges of that. And not surprisingly, we talk a lot about founder CEOs because they are the catalyst for so much of the entity. And from 25 years of focusing on these companies, I have observed 5 different models, if you will, of founder CEO. The most common is what we refer to as the scientist steward. And the scientist steward you see often in life science companies and quantum companies and spinouts from universities. So this will typically be a principal investigator, a PhD, a postdoc whose authority as CEO comes from their technical and scientific background. And in many cases, these are absolutely the ideal people to build a startup, especially at this early stage, when so much of it of the challenge is about the technology risk and understanding the technology, determining if there's anything really novel there, and where that might matter in the value chain that ultimately they decide to get into.
Well, I love this word steward because it's this idea of stewarding the process or finding the opportunity. Such a brilliant combination.
And that's exactly it. But it's also a steward of the phase. A scientific steward. When companies set out on the lab to market journey, we talk in terms of TRLs as well. So if you're thinking about TRL 1 to 3, you're in the research phase. There are few commercialization or scale up and manufacturing pressures at this point, and there shouldn't be any. We're just trying to getting from TRL 1, which is observation of basic phenomena, to TRL 2, which is what I might do with that phenomena in order to change something in the real world. That challenge, actually moving from TRL 1 to TRL 2, is kind of the whole crux of the entire company.
Yeah,
that is such an important transition, and often people don't make enough of it, I think. That's the whole entire spark. That's the reason for existence. And so scientific stewards are there to kind of oversee and manage that, but then also to make sure that they're adhering to the scientific method, that they're not letting their excitement of building something lead to overpromises, that they're not looking to commercialize too quickly or achieve kind of what I call false clarity on the utility of a discovery, that they're letting the process play out. And scientists are wonderful for this. They adhere to the scientific method, where the evidence from the science tells us that will be our guide. And so that's how they're the steward.
They're sort of establishing the tempo as well.
It is absolutely the rigor, the culture, the acceptance of being wrong, as you often are, especially in this phase. You're going to be wrong a lot. But that scientist steward, because they know the technology so well, and maybe they've had some experience operating in a lab, they're kind of an ideal early deep tech founder CEO for certain types of platforms and certain types of domains of deep tech. The second one we see a lot is the systems builder. And typically these are engineers by background, and they're generally applied engineers. So they often come from areas like aerospace, complex systems integration, semiconductors is a big one. The scientist steward, I would give you Demis Hassabis from DeepMind, or Jennifer Doudna from CRISPR. The systems builder, I would think about Jensen Huang as kind of the perfect systems builder. Maybe J.B. Straubel from Redwood Materials in the US as well. But these are engineers who aren't so concerned about the science or the technology. They're concerned about building the overall machine.
Yeah.
How do we take this fragile insight that we've gained somehow, and how do we build that into a production system? And then how do we build an entire machine around us to support us in that endeavor? The one that I'm sure everyone will recognize, the visionary narrator. And everyone can think of who probably the number one visionary narrator in the world would be Elon Musk. Visionary narrators may or may not be technical by background, but generally they kind of design and control the entire storytelling arc. And they generally attract the most capital. They can attract outstanding talent early on. They build such momentum. These are individuals that you feel sometimes could kind of change particular industries because their storytelling skills are so pronounced. But then there's a cautionary tale too, in that if we think about other other visionary narrators, I'm thinking of Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos.
I was too.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, we know how that
It works
ended.
both ways. Yeah.
It works both ways. And so each archetype has some things they're really good at,
Yeah.
and some things that represent real risks to them and to the board. And we can talk about how to manage these. There are two more. One is the domain insider. And the domain insider is someone who has, let's say, spent years working in a particular industry or with a particular process. And they often bring with them a process innovation, a production innovation. They can apply ways of doing things to new technologies. And they understand the dynamics of particular industries extremely well. Actually, there are two really good examples. And Robin Zhang from CATL, the largest battery manufacturer in the world, in China. And then Peter Carlson, who was of Northvolt. And Peter and Robin are both domain insiders. Peter was VP of supply chain at Tesla, and Robin had worked in the battery industry for most of his career. And yet they had very different outcomes. CATL has roughly 40% of the battery market globally now, and we know what happened to Northvolt.
Yeah.
So similar profiles, similar domains, but very different outcomes.
And they began their career more on the corporate side. So
yes,
learning the nuts and bolts.
They did. Yes, exactly.
On the large primes.
Really learning the
corporates.
industry and so on.
Yeah.
And then the final one is the repeat founder. Someone who has done lots of startups. I think of Bob Langer from Moderna in the US, the vaccine maker. He's done about 40 different startups. He's never run any of them. He's generally, not so much been a founder CEO, but he's been the founding catalyst.
Yeah.
So very early on, you could say he's almost been like a CEO, but when it becomes operational, he hands over. So those are the 5 distinct archetypes. The reality, though, is that people are messy. And so we often see people that, that have a blend. So let's take Elon. Elon is a visionary narrator. He's somewhat technical. I think he's got an engineering degree, but really he was an economics major. But he knows enough engineering, and he's clearly learned a lot. So he's got a bit of the systems builder, and he's also a repeat founder.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
But almost his modus operandi is really as a visionary narrator. And I think everyone's a little bit like that. There are a few people who are actually domain purists, if you will. The point is for founders to be aware of it for themselves and for boards to be aware of it. So when they're evaluating founders and trying to ask the tough questions, they're aware of what the risks may be.
Yes. I love this framework because it just helps raise awareness, because everyone has their default. And I've written about what I call the Goldilocks paradox, where founders tend to over-index on their strengths. I think we all do, right? We tend to do what has generally worked in the past. And so it's this whole idea of being self-aware when maybe your strength isn't the right tool to apply in a specific situation. And I wonder if we could just talk about some examples that maybe you've seen where a systems builder was really leaning hard into building systems, and that wasn't the right approach at a specific moment in time or for a particular issue or risk.
Let me tell you about the common ones that I see almost on repeat. The obvious one is the scientist steward who fails to build the complementary skills and support to bring those skills and support and that guidance into the decision-making control center of the company in time to save the company. This is the most common one I've seen. So we talk about the scientist steward as ideally being kind of that objective steward of the science. What we see often happen is when they're successful, as the companies that we deal with often are, they raise a Series A. That's quite a chunky number, especially in deep tech, to go and build a pilot somewhere. And then they start to change. And what happens is the pressure from the enterprise now, from the different stakeholders, begins to take its toll. And sometimes, and the excitement starts to impact them in some way. and they start to see themselves in the same light as many of these other super successful entrepreneurs that are out there. And quite rightly, we idolize entrepreneurs now in a way that we didn't when I was growing up. And there's a bit of celebrity that comes with that. So I think people kind of go through this change. And with young people who are emerging from universities or from national laboratories with little experience, I think the emotional toll is significant. And it challenges a whole bunch of things that maybe we can get into a little later. And so the board will then sit there and think, well, there's a lot of good this scientist steward can bring. They've evolved somewhat into a visionary narrator. The role they find for themselves is a public profile. Jan Getz describes it as the foreign minister of the company, kind of going out to conferences,
the ambassador,
popping up on Bloomberg, going on all the media. That's their role. So they tell the story. They're good at raising capital, at exciting people about it. What they don't do enough of is spend time in the company. Typically, not all of them, but they often, leave that to people who understand how to run a company. But at some stage, issues and challenges begin to emerge in that. And it's this is almost on repeat when we start to see this kind of breakdown. And so I think that the challenge for any founder CEO embodying any type of archetype is to adapt. Scientist stewards need to become much more proficient with operations. They need to have that commercialization plan and the narrative around that be both inspiring, but also it has to converge with reality in some way.
Yeah, that's tricky.
That's really tough. So it's got to be inspiring. You want to get attention, but you're really trying to get the buy-in from your value chain, from the partners and customers that are going to be around you. So you have to, and it's difficult on so many levels to make that happen. Suddenly the questions around credibility emerge. They've kind of then gone into a visionary narrator role outside of the original scientist steward. And frankly, what they're saying isn't matching with reality. And then they lose the trust of the investors, of the different stakeholders, the value chain, the partners, and eventually the thing blows up. So that's a common one for scientist stewards.
I've seen that with the clients that I work with. They're just pulled in so many directions. They need to be the outward facing voice of the company. And yet there are, dysfunctional patterns happening within the team. And I think it's really helpful to have somebody objective who can give them a sense of how to walk that tightrope, because it must be really hard just to know, how much should I be focusing my time here or there, and where's the right balance?
It is. And you, as an executive, you typically learn that through trial and error. Those are emotional lessons. When there's an emotional tinge to a lesson, you remember it.
Exactly.
And so, and that generally means screwing up. You've got to screw up. And it's also helpful to have people who are more senior than you to kind of guide you and say, hey, look, this is how we get things done. A lot of deep tech entrepreneurs don't like to talk about this so much, but management is super important. Because when it's time to get serious, management and aligning with industrial norms and processes is the only way you get to scale. And you need to integrate with other value chains and with other corporate partners and industries that have their own standards that they've had for decades and that are regularly updated, and they have ways of doing things. You're unlikely to change that. So you have to transition to professional management at some point. And so then you need to bring on board some of that corporate thinking and those processes. The question is when you choose to do that. And so if you're a founder CEO in this case who never has had any professional experience, that's going to be a real struggle. It's not impossible. You've got to work very hard to find a credible role for yourself in that organization once you've scaled and once you're really serving the market.
I want to pick up on what you were saying about executives and how they learn from experience. I've heard you talk about maturity. And not necessarily a function of age, but we've all seen the founders that have this sort of built-in maturity where they are able to bring a certain wisdom and humility and vulnerability to their role. So I would love to learn more about, what you've seen, because building trust when you're building a deep tech company is so important because you're going to need your team supporting you. What have you seen in terms of maturity? What does that look like? What does it not look like?
It's a super interesting topic. I have seen a lot more immaturity than maturity in leaders of all ages. But if I were going to advise someone or equip someone with the right kinds of qualities to take on a deep tech leadership role of some kind, the obvious ones are, yes, you have to be relentless, you have to be curious, you have to be a super learner. Those kind of go.
Those are a given.
The kind of not so obvious things here, especially in deep tech, and especially if you want to be around for a while. The first one for me is, as you mentioned earlier, maturity. And for me, maturity is about having a strong internal locus of control. And that means basically being able to control yourself, not letting yourself get swept away by passions, by different emotions, by being able to keep your shit together. And you've got to keep it together in front of your team, because if you don't, that will scare them off. You have to keep it together in front of your board. You certainly have to keep it together in front of your market.
What does that mean, though? Keep it together.
So the pressure from running one of these businesses is going to be enormous. You need to close your fundraise. You need to make very difficult people decisions. You need to hit a milestone to enable your next fundraise. And I know plenty who, in certain commercial discussions, will let the narrative get slightly ahead of where the delivery is going to be. Okay,
overpromising.
A lot overpromising. We'll go back to Theranos, and Elizabeth Holmes. I don't think she necessarily set out to deceive from day one. And I think a lot of people who kind of joined her probably thought, all right, well, she hasn't completed her degree. She doesn't, she knows nothing about medical diagnostics. But this is Stanford. This is the Valley. We can do anything. Let's give it a go. But that's a really good example of what happens when you let the pressure get to you. So someone who's got a really good internal locus of control will not let that happen. They won't oversell things in order to get the deal, in order to get the fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
And that's difficult. And it's even more difficult when investors are encouraging you to do it.
Pushing you. Yeah.
Because they're pushing you to do it because they want the deal closed as well at this valuation. Because, of course, you've got all this pressure in on each other. Everyone's hoping for the same kind of outcome. And often that relies on that CEO saying something or doing something at times that they don't want to do. So having, and others might call it integrity. Integrity is a huge part of it.
Mm.
But it's understanding what I believe, what I stand for, and I'm not going to bend to anyone on that. I will adapt as I need to, but I'm gonna keep my stuff together, and I'm not gonna get swayed by negative forces, if you will.
Yeah. And it's no small feat because the pressures are huge. The amount of money and
as a
resources.
53-year-old man, I can tell you that I've gotten much, much better at it, but it is hard, but it is still hard. So, but I think it's really important if you want to last. Deep tech companies take a long time to manifest. You want to go the distance. I think you need that. I also think it'll keep you sane. So that's one. That's kind of the maturity piece for me.
Can we go into one specific detail that I think is recurring for deep tech, which is when they have a milestone and they see that, let's say it's in 18 months that they've said that they're going to make a certain milestone and they realize that they're not, or that they realize that there's a technical obstacle or challenge that they're going to have to deal with that's going to slow them down. How do you, what do the best or the most mature or high integrity founders, how do they speak the truth, stay in integrity without, killing
the momentum.
Killing the momentum.
That's a big one.
And keeping trust.
That entirely comes down to the character of the individual delivering that message. And I'm thinking of one example in particular right now, a company I've dealt with for a long time, where just that situation happened, as it does. And the area is very competitive. The science is very difficult. The technology is notoriously tricky. But he had to go and deliver this message to some serious partners.
Mm-hmm.
But within these value chains, regardless of culture, I think nothing will get you more points than just being honest and having a plan. So to your point about how do you keep the momentum going? One, I have to acknowledge that we didn't hit the milestone. We're struggling with thermal runway. We're struggling with something else, whatever the technical issue may be. But we have a plan. So here's what we're doing. And then kind of going into detail on that plan. And
that's really what people want to know,
maybe
is that you've thought through.
Because look, science and technology and engineering, they're hard.
Yeah.
And especially when it's new, it's hard. So it's not the first time the partners will have heard, oh, we haven't made this. If they want all the value and benefit that comes from innovation, they have to expect mistakes.
Yeah.
So I think
or miscalculations even.
Or miscalculations, exactly. But I think it's a bigger mistake to wait until the last second. I think if companies are on top of it, if they can see the trajectory of a particular exercise is going south, then let them know early. And in letting them know early, then they have time to plan and formulate their communication to their superiors or to their other partners. But that's a function of integrity, that locus of control. Do the mature, good thing. Let's act like good partners. We're interested in the long term here. So I'm going to behave with you like I respect you, which I do. And I want, and I want to keep our discussions going. I want you to be able to rely on me.
Yeah, such an important skill to have. And I think so many founders don't realize the power of just telling the truth sooner rather than later.
So maturity is a big one. Humility is a massive one. Building a deep tech company, I think, is the hardest thing humans can do. So I think you have to remain humble. And I think the humbler you are, the more honest you are about where you're at, where your company's at, what's left to do, the challenges we have, actually, the faster you're going to go. So I've seen a real correlation between humility and pace. People who are truly humble, truly honest, radically candid, as Ray Dalio would say, they are the people that move faster. And the cultures that are radically candid, no bullshit, no lying, no misrepresenting anything. We're ridiculously honest with ourselves about where we're at. They're the cultures that move faster, that get things done quicker, because you don't have any of the personal BS to contend with.
There's a certain objectivity you're bringing to the scene, to the situation. And I think that really creates trust, because people see that you see things as they are, that you're not avoiding things, you're not pumping up the reality or wishful thinking.
Exactly.
And that's what that takes away the friction.
It does. It really can. And so if you have that humility, we're going to be radically candid about where we're at. We're not going to lie ever. We're not going to misrepresent ever. Yeah. Because if we do that, then we have to double back or we have to hide it. Then you spend 100% of your time in the cover up and 0% of your time actually moving forward.
Right. And then building back trust once somebody discovers.
Forget it. I mean, once you lose it, you lose it. And I think humility is the key there. And then the final one, which frankly, I don't see enough of, but I believe I've seen it on occasion, is love. And it's not necessarily love for your team, because I don't think it's about that. I think there's kind of an overarching love for humanity and love for, and appreciation of people around me, but I don't see it as love in the way that, you may love your family, or I see these companies as more like high performance sports teams. So there's respect, there's training, there's work. We work together. We take a professional approach to performance. With families, you don't do that. Families, you're bound together by blood, and even if you want to ditch a couple of them, sometimes you can't. Companies don't work that way. I'd like to think we are professionals in the way we conduct ourselves, in the way we perform, and and the best teams are going to look for all the different approaches to improve their performance. But that being said, there's a kindness, an openness. There's a gentleness that creates freedom, and the freedom is so important, especially in the early days of a lab to market journey, where you need that freedom to be wrong. And you need the freedom to experiment. And you need the freedom to, again, especially in the early days, you're making more mistakes than than none. And you need to be able to forgive very quickly. And at the root of forgiveness is love of yourself, mainly, because you're going to make so many mistakes. And I find that for a lot of people I talk to, they're kind of racked with this frustration and guilt and so on. And I saw this somewhere else on a podcast, so I can't claim credit for it, but I thought it was amazing. And the guy said, if you really want to be able to move fast, he said, your biggest enemy is yourself. And it's you laying
You're
up
putting
at
on
night.
the brakes.
You're putting the brakes on because you're wrestling with all these mistakes you make.
Yes.
And all the shit you do. And God, did I really say that? How stupid am I? And all this, and did I really make
all the
that
second
decision?
guessing? Yeah.
And all the second guessing. I said, if you really want to go fast, you've got to forgive yourself and forgive yourself again and again and again.
That's a skill that I try to teach my clients. How do you forgive yourself? Yeah. Because they feel like they need to suffer, right? If they're not suffering, they're not trying hard enough. And actually, like you say, they're actually slowing themselves down.
But to that point, so that would be my ideal. There's another side to this, though. And the other side to this may be more grounded in my actual observations of what I've seen is this. There are people out there with unresolved trauma of some kind that manifests itself as a chip on their shoulder, something about themselves they're fighting against. And they haven't been able to diagnose it. But it doesn't matter because that chip is what's leading them, is what's firing them forward to go and build something. And it almost acts as a nuclear fuel. It will never run out. They will never be able to resolve it, for many. And so they will keep going. And that, I just wonder if that contributes a little bit to that relentless quality that exists in certain types of people. And I'll give you an example of where I've seen, one anecdote in particular. There was a guy I used to advise who was CEO of a startup company some years ago, and he sold out. He exited the company. He made a lot of money. And he decided to take a couple of years out and to rebuild his marriage and his relationship with his family. And he wanted to go spend some time reading, hiking, thinking, meditating, all those things. And he came back. Everyone was very excited to have him back in the marketplace. Because they said, oh, you can apply all of these things you've learned and you had this great big win and now you're back. And he tried to get back into the market and it was okay.
Oh, he didn't have the same drive?
All the drive was gone. And so when things got tough, I don't have to do this anymore. And he just didn't have the same things pushing him. And I think he did a few board positions after that. And he got into charitable work, where actually he's been very successful again. So sometimes we want to know what's driving us, but sometimes I wonder if it's more helpful to not know what's driving us, but just to know that we're driven. Because when we resolve the thing, whatever it is, trauma or whatever, and we can live with ourselves and we love ourselves a little bit more, are we going to have the same drive? And it's just a question. Maybe it's an ideal question for you, but it's one of the things that I've observed.
I'm itching to counter that.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure. It's definitely not healthy. So I'm not advising this for anyone. But from what I've seen, when I look at some of the leaders that I know who are moving things on, who are powering ahead, these are not balanced, healthy people by and large.
Right.
They're
I agree
the ones
with that.
actually stand out. They're not balanced and healthy. So I wonder how realistic is it to expect a balanced and healthy person to get to the end of the. Now, there are a lot of people in the life science fields that I think this doesn't relate to, because I think life science has a slightly different rhythm and energy to it. But I think in the hard tech fields, I've noticed it in particular.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand that. And I agree that it's been the dominant model. But my hypothesis is that ultimately there is a ceiling of how much you can accomplish. And so I'm on a mission to see if we can create a different kind of model for founders so that they don't have to burn out, they don't have to have this unhealthy path, and they can accomplish great things.
I wholeheartedly support that. And I think you're right. I don't think it's sustainable in any kind of healthy way.
Right. And this example you gave, luckily he still had his relationship, but there are many relationships that don't survive this kind of unhealthy founder approach.
And if you think about the level of innovation, it's not just about getting one product or one technology to market. If you want to be a lasting company, You need to get many. So you need to be innovating at scale. That's the real challenge with this kind of stuff. So these things have to become so baked into your approach, and they have to be sustainable. And the kind of 996 philosophy that I see banded around on social media, sorry, it might be possible for a few years in in a software company, an agentic AI company. I don't think it's workable when you're pushing the fundamental boundary of science.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that.
And technology. I don't think that's sustainable. I think people need rest. They need sleep. They need
relationships.
They would need relationships as well. So I think there are certain times when that energy is called for. No, it's never static. But I think we have to be realistic too, especially at the later stages where then you're just trying to build, the sustainable operation of the business. And you have to have practices that are going to continue to innovate, but also that are sustainable. In the early stages, yes, you may have to have a couple of years where it's a little crazy in order to get it over the line, but you can't maintain that.
Yeah. And I think it does come back to that self-management we talked about. Yeah. Wow, Chris, I'm really excited to dive further into the archetypes. I'll put a link to the article that you wrote. And thank you so much for sharing all these insights.
You're most welcome. Lovely speaking with you.